The rogue promised not to harm her, until her scent broke his vow beneath the moon. The winter wind howled through the stone corridors of Castle Greymark, carrying with it the scent of pine and approaching snow. Lady Alara pressed her palm against the cold iron bars of her chamber window, watching the torchlight flicker across the courtyard below. 3 moons had passed since her father, Lord Edmund, had fallen in battle against the northern clans, leaving her as the sole heir to lands that stretched from the River Ash to the Blackwood Forest. But inheritance meant nothing when the kingdom's laws deemed women unfit to hold such territories without a husband's name to legitimize their claim. The heavy oak door creaked open behind her, and she didn't need to turn to know who had entered. His presence carried a weight that shifted the very air in the room, a predatory awareness that made her spine straighten instinctively. Cale Thornwood, the rogue warrior her uncle had hired as her personal guard, though she suspected protection was not his only purpose. Men like him didn't sell their swords for mere coin. They wanted power, land, or freedom from past crimes. Before we continue with Alara's story, if you're enjoying this medieval tale, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers from around the world. "You stand too close to the window, my lady." Cale's voice rumbled from the shadows near the doorway. "Archers have clear sight from the eastern tower." Alara finally turned to face him, her emerald eyes meeting his steel-gray gaze. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his collar, and a scar that traced from his left temple to his jaw, a reminder of whatever violence had shaped him before he'd appeared at her uncle's court 6 weeks ago. Unlike the other guards who wore the Greymark colors, Cale dressed in worn leather and dark wool, refusing any uniform that would mark him as belonging to anyone. "My uncle's archers?" she asked coolly. "Or are there others I should fear?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "In times like these, my lady, everyone should fear everyone." She moved away from the window, her heavy velvet skirts whispering across the stone floor. "Then why did you make that promise to my uncle? That you wouldn't harm me, no matter what orders you received?" Cale's expression hardened, the brief moment of levity vanishing. "Because I've done enough harm in my life. Some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed. Yet you're a hired blade. Isn't harm your profession? There's a difference between killing men who know they're entering a fight and hurting those who can't defend themselves." He stepped further into the room, and she noticed he moved with the fluid grace of a predator, every step calculated, balanced. "Your uncle wanted insurance that I'd keep you alive until he could arrange your marriage to Lord Blackwood. I wanted coin and a place to winter where past enemies couldn't find me. We both got what we needed." "Except I didn't agree to any of it," Alara said, anger flaring in her chest. "Not the marriage, not the guard, not being locked in these chambers like a prisoner in my own castle." "No," Cale agreed, his voice softening slightly. "You didn't, but your uncle holds the power now. And until you're wed, or find another way to secure your claim, you're valuable property. Property needs protecting." The word stung because it was true. In this kingdom, in this medieval world of rigid hierarchy and ironclad laws, women of noble birth were bargaining chips, their bodies and bloodlines traded like livestock at market. Her father had been different. He'd trained her in diplomacy, taught her the maps and treaties, prepared her to rule. But he was gone. And the world had no place for a woman who wanted to lead, rather than submit. "And what happens when spring comes?" she asked quietly. "When Lord Blackwood arrives to claim his bride? Will you stand aside and watch me be dragged to his bed, knowing he's twice my age and cruel to his servants?" Cale's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something dark and volatile that made her breath catch. Then he controlled it, smoothing his features back into careful neutrality. "That's not my concern, my lady. My contract ends when you're safely wed." "How convenient for you." She turned away, blinking back the angry tears that threatened. She refused to cry in front of him, refused to show weakness to a man who'd sold himself to her jailer. She heard him move closer, his boots soft on the stone. "There's something you should know," he said, his voice lower now, almost careful. "Your uncle plans to move the wedding forward. Lord Blackwood arrives in 10 days, not the month you were promised." Alara spun to face him, shock momentarily overriding her anger. 10 days? But the contracts have been amended. Your uncle fears the northern clans might challenge your inheritance before the marriage is complete. He wants you legally bound to Blackwood before they can object. 10 days, she whispered, the reality crushing down on her. 10 days until her life ended. Until she became property in truth, rather than just in law. Cale was standing close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his gray eyes, close enough to notice the way his chest rose and fell with controlled breaths. "I shouldn't have told you," he said. "It's not part of my duty." "Then why did you?" He looked away, jaw working. "Because you deserve to know. Because you're—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. It doesn't matter. But Alara had seen something in his face, heard something in the words he'd bitten back. She took a step closer, studying him with new awareness. "You feel something," she said slowly. "For me. Don't." The word came out rough, almost a growl. "Don't make this more complicated than it already is." "Why? Because you're a hired blade and I'm noble-born? Because my uncle pays your wages?" She moved closer still, close enough now that she could smell leather and pine and something else, something distinctly male and intoxicating that made her pulse quicken. "Or because you actually meant that promise, and caring about me makes it harder to keep?" Kyle's hands flexed at his sides, and she saw the war playing across his features, discipline battling against something wilder, more primal. "You need to step back, my lady." "And if I don't?" His eyes locked on hers, and the intensity there stole her breath. "Then I might do something we'll both regret." The air between them crackled with tension, heavy with unspoken desire and forbidden possibility. Alara knew she should listen, should retreat to safety. But she was tired of being told what to do, tired of being powerless in her own life. If she had only 10 days of freedom left, she'd spend them making her own choices. "Maybe," she whispered. "I want to regret something. Maybe I want one thing in my life to be mine alone." Cale's control visibly frayed, his breathing becoming less steady. "Alara?" Hearing her name from his lips, without the formal title, sent heat spiraling through her body. She'd never felt this before. This magnetic pull, this aching need to close the distance between them. Was this what the poets wrote about? This madness that made reason irrelevant? The castle bells tolled, marking the hour, and the sound broke whatever spell had woven around them. Cale stepped back abruptly, putting distance between them with visible effort. "I'll be outside your door," he said, his voice strained. "If you need anything, call for me." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with racing thoughts and a body that still hummed with awareness. She pressed her fingers to her lips, wondering what might have happened if those bells hadn't rung, if he hadn't retreated behind his walls of duty and honor. 10 days. She had 10 days to decide what she wanted more: safety and compliance, or risk in rebellion. And somewhere in that equation was Cale Thornwood, the rogue who'd promised not to harm her, but might destroy her in entirely different ways. The night deepened, and Alara couldn't sleep. She paced her chambers, mind spinning with possibilities and fears. Tomorrow she would begin planning, whether for escape or revolution, she hadn't yet decided. But one thing had become clear in those charged moments with Cale. She would not go meekly to her fate. Outside her door, Cale stood guard, his own thoughts equally turbulent. He'd made many mistakes in his 30 years, committed acts he'd never be able to atone for. But that promise to her uncle, that he wouldn't harm Alara, had seemed simple enough at the time. He'd thought it meant keeping her physically safe, protecting her from external threats. He hadn't anticipated that the greatest threat might be himself, hadn't anticipated that she would be fierce instead of fragile, brave instead of broken. Hadn't anticipated the way her scent seemed to seep into his senses, something floral and feminine mixed with the strength of her spirit. It reminded him of wild roses that grew on the cliffs near his childhood home, beautiful but thorned, surviving in impossible conditions. In the hierarchy of their world, she was far above him. She was the alpha in status and bloodline, while he was merely a rogue, a blade for hire, omega in the social order despite his physical strength. The natural order demanded he submit to her authority, yet their circumstances had inverted everything. She was caged while he held the keys. She was powerless while he could decide her fate. It was wrong. All of it was wrong. But writing it would mean betraying his contract, probably meaning his death. Men who broke their word to powerful lords didn't live long, no matter how skilled with a sword they might be. He'd survived this long by being smart, by controlling his impulses, by never letting emotion cloud judgment. Yet when she'd stood close to him, when her emerald eyes had challenged him to be more than just a hired blade, something had shifted inside him. The vow he'd made to never harm her suddenly felt far more complex than simple physical protection. Letting her be forced into a marriage she didn't want. Wasn't that harm? Watching her spirit be broken by a cruel old man. Wasn't that violence of another kind? He gripped his sword hilt tighter, the familiar leather-wrapped handle grounding him. 9 days left. 9 days to decide if he was still the man who'd murdered for coin, or if Alara had awakened something different, something he'd thought dead years ago. Inside her chamber, Alara finally settled onto her bed, pulling the heavy furs around her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities. She just had to be smart enough to recognize them and brave enough to seize them. The moon hung full and bright outside her window, casting silver light across the stone walls. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled, real wolves, the kind that still roamed the Blackwood forest. Their cries sounded like longing, like hunger, like wild things refusing to be tamed. Alara smiled in the darkness. Perhaps she had more in common with wolves than she'd thought. The morning brought heavy snow, blanketing Castle Greymark in white silence. Alara woke to find a breakfast tray had been left inside her door, fresh bread, cheese, dried meat, and mulled wine still steaming in a pewter cup. She ate slowly, gathering her thoughts, planning her next move. When Cale entered to escort her to her uncle's solar for their daily audience, she studied him carefully. His expression was controlled, professional, giving nothing away. But she noticed the shadows under his eyes, suggesting he'd slept as poorly as she had. "Good morning, my lady," he said formally. "Is it?" she replied, wrapping a heavy cloak around her shoulders. "With 9 days left of my freedom?" His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, merely opening the door and gesturing for her to proceed. She swept past him, close enough that her skirts brushed his legs, close enough to catch his sharp intake of breath. The corridors of Greymark were cold despite the braziers burning at intervals, and servants hurried past with their heads down, focused on their tasks. The castle had felt different since her father's death. Darker somehow, as if the stones themselves mourned the loss of their true lord. Her uncle's solar was in the western tower, a room that had been her father's until Edmund claimed it for his own. When they entered, Lord Edmund was standing by the window, his back to them, hands clasped behind his back. He was a thin man, all sharp angles and calculating eyes, more politician than warrior. "Niece," he said without turning, "I trust you slept well?" "As well as any prisoner might, uncle." Now he did turn, his lips pressed into a thin line. "You are not a prisoner, Elara. You are being protected." Protected or prepared for sale? The distinction seems unclear. Edmund's eyes flashed with irritation, but he controlled himself, smoothing his velvet doublet. "Lord Blackwood is a powerful ally. This marriage secures our borders, protects our people, and ensures your future comfort. You should be grateful." Grateful to be sold to a man who beats his servants and murdered his last wife? Malicious rumors, nothing more. Edmund moved to his desk, picking up a rolled parchment. "The date is set. Lord Blackwood arrives in 9 days. The ceremony will take place immediately upon his arrival." Elara's hands clenched at her sides. "You move too quickly. The traditional mourning period is a luxury we cannot afford. The northern clans grow bolder. They've already sent messengers questioning your claim. Once you're Lady Blackwood, they'll have no grounds to challenge. And if I refuse..." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Edmund set down the parchment, his gaze hardening. "Then, I will have you declared unfit to inherit due to mental incapacity, and the lands will pass to me as regent. You'll be sent to a convent where you can contemplate your stubbornness for the rest of your days. Is that what you prefer?" Elara felt the walls closing in, felt the trap snapping shut around her. A convent meant true imprisonment, meant giving up any hope of ever controlling her own fate. At least as Lord Blackwood's wife, she might find some way to influence events, to protect the people who depended on her. But the thought of submitting to him, of letting his hands touch her body, of bearing his children, it made her stomach revolt. "I see you understand your position," Edmund said with satisfaction. "Thornwood, you're dismissed. I wish to speak with my niece privately." Elara's eyes flew to Cale, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand had moved unconsciously toward his sword. For a moment she thought he might refuse, might break protocol to stay. But after a heartbeat's hesitation, he bowed stiffly and left, closing the door behind him. The instant they were alone, Edmund's civilized mask slipped. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Stop fighting this girl. Your father spoiled you, filled your head with ridiculous notions about women's capabilities. But he's dead, and now you must face reality. You will marry Blackwood. You will produce heirs, and you will be grateful that I've salvaged anything from your father's failures." "My father didn't fail," Elara said, her voice shaking with rage. "He built alliances, strengthened our defenses, ensured our people prospered. And then he died in a foolish battle, leaving a daughter instead of a son. That's the ultimate failure for a lord." Edmund grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "Lord Blackwood has paid a substantial bride price. I've already spent half of it securing support among the other lords. If you ruin this marriage, you'll ruin me, and I won't let that happen." He released her with a shove, and Elara stumbled back, catching herself against a chair. Her arm throbbed where he'd gripped it, and she knew there would be bruises. 9 days, Edmund said, composing himself again. Use them to make peace with your future. It's the only future you have. She was dismissed with a curt wave, and she fled the solar, desperate to escape his presence. Kyle was waiting in the corridor, and his eyes immediately went to her arm, where she was rubbing the bruised flesh. Something dark and dangerous crossed his face. What did he do? His voice was deadly quiet. Nothing that matters, Elara said quickly, not wanting to discuss it. Please, just take me back to my chambers. They walked in tense silence, Cale's presence like a coiled spring beside her. When they reached her door, he followed her inside instead of remaining in the corridor, a breach of protocol that should have alarmed her, but instead felt like relief. Let me see, he said, and it wasn't a request. Elara hesitated, then slowly pushed up her sleeve, revealing the angry red marks where Edmund's fingers had dug in. Kyle's expression turned to stone, but she saw the fury burning in his eyes. He hurt you. Each word was carefully controlled, as if he was holding back something violent. It's not the first time, Alara admitted quietly. Since my father died, my uncle has shown his true nature more freely. He knows I can't fight back. Kyle was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the bruises. Then he reached out, his calloused fingers ghosting over the marks with surprising gentleness. His touch sent shivers through her that had nothing to do with pain. "This ends," he said. "Today." "What do you mean?" He looked up, meeting her eyes, and she saw decision crystallizing in his gaze. "I mean I'm breaking my contract. I'm getting you out of here." Alara's heart leaped, hope and fear warring in her chest. "You can't. They'll hunt you down. They'll kill you. Probably." A bitter smile touched his lips. "But I've been living on borrowed time for years anyway. Might as well do something worthwhile with what's left." "Why?" She needed to understand, needed to know if this was real. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Kale's hand was still on her arm, his thumb now tracing gentle circles over the bruises as if he could somehow erase them. When he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "Because I made a promise not to harm you, and I'm beginning to understand what harm really means. It's not just physical wounds, is it? It's watching your spirit break. It's standing by while others hurt you. It's letting you be destroyed piece by piece because it's easier than standing up and fighting." He took a breath. "I've done terrible things, Alara. I've killed for coin, betrayed for survival, watched innocent people suffer because it wasn't my problem. But you're different. You make me want to be different." The confession hung between them, vulnerable and powerful. Alara felt something shift in her chest, a connection forming that went beyond mere attraction. This was understanding, recognition of kindred spirits in a world that had tried to break them both. "When?" she asked simply. "Tonight, during the guard change at midnight. I know a passage through the wine cellars that leads to the old crypt. From there we can reach the stables without being seen. We'll take horses and ride for the Blackwood Forest. I have contacts among the free traders who work those woods. They'll help us disappear." "And then what? We live as outlaws? Hunted forever?" "Maybe. Or maybe we find a way to gather support, to challenge your uncle's authority legally. You're the rightful heir, Alara. With the right backing, you could claim what's yours." It was dangerous, probably impossible. But it was also hope, and she'd been drowning in hopelessness for too long. "Tonight," she agreed. Kale's hand slid from her arm to her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The simple gesture felt monumental, a promise sealed between them. Then he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent heat flooding through her veins. "Pack light," he said, releasing her reluctantly, "only what you absolutely need. And trust no one, not the servants, not the other guards. I'll come for you at midnight." After he left, Alara stood in the center of her chamber, her mind racing. She had 9 days until her forced wedding, but she wasn't going to wait that long. Tonight she would take control of her own fate, with a rogue warrior at her side who'd somehow become the most honorable man she'd ever known. She moved to her wardrobe, pulling out practical travel clothes, sturdy wool and leather instead of silk and velvet. She found her father's hunting knife, the one he'd given her when she was 12, and insisted she learn to defend herself. She strapped it to her thigh beneath her skirts, the weight of it both familiar and empowering. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Servants came and went, bringing meals she barely touched. Her uncle sent a dressmaker to begin work on her wedding gown, a torture she endured by imagining herself anywhere but in that room, being measured and pinned for a ceremony that would never happen. As evening fell, Alara bathed and changed into the travel clothes she'd hidden beneath her formal dresses. She plaited her long auburn hair tightly, pinning it close to her head so it wouldn't interfere during their escape. She packed a small leather satchel with essentials. Her mother's ring, a small purse of coins she'd hidden away, a water flask, dried food she'd saved from her meals. The castle settled into its nighttime rhythms. Torches were lit in the corridors. Guards took their evening positions. Servants finished their final tasks before seeking their own beds. Elara extinguished her chamber's candles early, pretending to sleep while fully dressed beneath her covers, her packed satchel hidden beneath the bed. The hours stretched endlessly. She listened to every sound, her body taut with anticipation and anxiety. What if someone discovered their plan? What if Cale changed his mind? What if they were caught before they even left the castle grounds? But when the midnight bells began to toll, she heard the soft scrape of her door opening. Cale slipped inside, dressed in dark clothing, his sword at his hip and a traveling pack on his back. "Ready?" he whispered. Elara emerged from the bed, grabbing her satchel. "Yes." He took her hand, his grip strong and reassuring, and led her toward the door. The corridor was dark, lit only by dying torches at wide intervals. They moved silently, keeping to the shadows, and Cale guided her with the confidence of someone who'd memorized every inch of the castle's layout. They descended a narrow servants' staircase, spiraling down and down until Elara was certain they must be below even the main cellars. The air grew damp and cold, heavy with the scent of earth and stone. Finally, they reached a low door that Cale had to duck through, entering what appeared to be a wine cellar. Rows of barrels and bottles lined the walls, covered in dust and cobwebs. Kyle led her to the far corner, where he moved aside a large barrel to reveal a narrow opening in the stone wall. "This leads to the old crypt," he explained quietly. "When the castle was first built, this was the main entrance to where they buried the dead. It's been sealed off for decades, but I found it when I was exploring. The opening was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. Elara went first, with Cale following, pulling the barrel back into place behind them. On the other side, darkness was absolute. She heard Cale strike flint, and a moment later a small torch flared to life, casting dancing shadows on the rough stone walls. They were in a tunnel that sloped downward, the walls lined with ancient alcoves that once held the dead. Now they were empty. The bones long since moved to the castle's proper crypt. Their footsteps echoed eerily, and Elara tried not to think about how far underground they were, how many tons of stone and earth pressed down above them. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, but finally it began to slope upward again. Fresh air touched Elara's face, carrying the scent of hay and horses. They emerged into the back of the stables, where Kyle had clearly prepared for their escape. 2 horses were already saddled, their saddlebags packed with supplies. "These are the fastest horses in the stable," Kyle said, keeping his voice low. "We'll ride hard for the Blackwood Forest. Once we're under the trees, they'll have trouble tracking us." Elara approached her horse, stroking its nose gently. "What's its name?" "Storm, and mine is Shadow. Your father named them. He always had a talent for fitting names." The mention of her father made Elara's throat tight. He would have approved of this escape, she thought. He would have been proud that she chose freedom over submission. Cale helped her mount, his hand steady on her waist, and for a moment their faces were close together in the dim light. His eyes searched hers, and she saw uncertainty there. Not about the escape, but about what came after. "Once we leave," he said quietly, "there's no going back. You'll be an outlaw, hunted by your own uncle. Life will be hard, dangerous. Are you certain this is what you want?" Elara reached down, cupping his scarred face in her hand. "I want to live, Kyle. Really live. Not just exist as someone's property. Whatever comes, it's better than the alternative." He turned his face into her palm, pressing a kiss there that made her breath catch. Then he swung up onto his own horse with fluid grace, gathering the reins. "Then let's go claim that life," he said. They rode out of the stables into the snowy night, the full moon painting everything silver and black. The castle gates were closed and guarded, but Kyle led her to a section of the outer wall where time and weather had crumbled the stones, creating a gap just wide enough for the horses to pass through single file. Freedom opened before them. The dark line of the Blackwood Forest in the distance, the open fields covered in pristine snow, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. Behind them, Castle Greymark rose dark and forbidding, a prison she was leaving forever. Ilara urged Storm forward, the horse responding to her touch with powerful strides. Beside her, Kyle rode Shadow with the easy competence of someone born to the saddle. The cold wind whipped her face, making her eyes water, but she didn't care. She was free. For the first time in months, she was actually free. They rode hard through the night, putting distance between themselves and the castle. Kale knew the land well, guiding them along paths that avoided the main roads, keeping to terrain where their tracks would be harder to follow. When dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they finally reached the edge of the Blackwood Forest. The trees rose like sentinels, their branches heavy with snow, their depths mysterious and shadowed. This was Old Forest, the kind where wolves still hunted, and where people told stories of strange things glimpsed between the trees. But Ilara felt no fear as they entered the woods. Instead, she felt anticipation, as if the forest itself welcomed her as a kindred spirit. They rode deeper into the trees until Kale finally called a halt, dismounting in a small clearing where a frozen stream cut through the snow. Both horses were breathing hard, their flanks steaming in the cold air. "We'll rest here for a few hours," Kale said, helping Ilara down. "Let the horses recover and wait to see if there's any immediate pursuit. If we're lucky, they won't discover you're gone until morning, and by then our tracks will be covered by fresh snow." Ilara's legs were shaky from the long ride, and she leaned against Storm for support. Her body ached, her hands were numb with cold, but her heart soared. They'd done it. They'd actually escaped. Kale spread a blanket near a fallen log that provided some shelter from the wind, then built a small fire, keeping it low to avoid drawing attention. The flames were welcome warmth, and Ilara sank down beside them gratefully, holding her hands out to the heat. "Here." Kyle handed her a skin of water and some dried meat. "Eat something. You need your strength." She ate obediently, suddenly realizing how hungry she was. The meat was tough but flavorful, and the water cleared her head. Kale sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, both of them staring into the flames. "Thank you," Ilara said quietly, "for choosing me over your contract, over your safety." Kale was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't choose you over those things. I chose to finally be the man I wanted to be instead of the man circumstances made me. There's a difference." "What made you become a sellsword?" she asked. "You mentioned doing terrible things. What happened to you?" His jaw tensed, and she thought he might not answer. But then he sighed, shoulders slumping slightly. "I was born in a village near the border. Small place, maybe 50 families. When I was 16, the northern clans raided us. They killed everyone. My parents, my younger sister, all our neighbors. I survived only because I was in the woods hunting when they came." Ilara's heart clenched with sympathy. "I'm so sorry." "After that I had nothing. No family, no home, no purpose. I drifted, took work where I could find it. Eventually I learned that I was good at fighting, good at killing, and it was easier to be a weapon than to feel anything." He looked at her, his gray eyes haunted. "For 14 years, I've been that weapon. I've killed people who probably didn't deserve it. I've worked for lords who were as bad as the ones they fought against. I told myself it didn't matter, that nothing mattered. But something changed, Ilara said softly. You changed it. When your uncle hired me to guard you, I thought it would be like any other job. But then I met you, fierce and brave even when you were trapped. You reminded me that some things do matter. That honor isn't just a word nobles use to justify their actions. That promises should mean something. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair that had escaped her braid behind her ear. You reminded me that I'm still human, not just a sword. The tenderness of the gesture, combined with his words, broke something open in Ilara's chest. She turned toward him, her hand finding his where it rested on his knee. You're a good man, Cale Thornwood. Whatever you've done in the past, you're making different choices now. Because of you, he said, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. Everything is because of you. The air between them thickened with awareness. The same magnetic pull she'd felt in her chamber returning with even greater intensity. Out here in the forest, with the fire crackling and the snow falling gently around them, there was no uncle watching, no contracts binding them, no protocols demanding distance. There was only the two of them, and the choice of what came next. Cale's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his calloused palm warm against her cold skin. Ilara, he whispered, her name a question and a prayer. She answered by leaning forward, closing the distance between them, and pressing her lips to his. The kiss started gentle, tentative, as if they were both afraid this moment might shatter. But then Cale made a low sound in his throat, his hand sliding into her hair, and the gentleness transformed into something deeper, more urgent. Ilara's fingers clutched at his shirt, pulling him closer, losing herself in sensations she'd never experienced. The rough warmth of his mouth, the solid strength of his body, the way her pulse thundered in her ears. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kyle rested his forehead against hers. We should stop, he said, though he made no move to pull away. You deserve better than a hasty tumble in the forest. I deserve to make my own choices, Ilara countered, her voice husky. And I choose this. I choose you. Something in his control snapped. He kissed her again, deeper this time, with all the pent-up desire they'd both been fighting. His hands roamed her back, pulling her into his lap, and she went willingly, straddling him, feeling the hard evidence of his desire pressing against her core through their layers of clothing. She'd never been intimate with anyone before. Her noble upbringing had kept her sheltered, pure, for whatever husband her family chose. But her father had made sure she understood the mechanics of it, had answered her questions honestly, rather than leaving her in ignorance like so many women of her station. Still, knowledge and experience were different things. When Cale's mouth left hers to trail kisses down her throat, when his hands found the laces of her travel vest and began to loosen them, she trembled, not with fear, but with anticipation. Tell me if you want me to stop, he murmured against her skin. At any point, just say the word. Don't stop, she breathed. Please don't stop. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers in the firelight. You're certain? There's no rush, Ilara. We have time now. Do we? She asked with bitter honesty. They'll be hunting us soon. Who knows how long we have? I don't want to waste a single moment of freedom wondering what if. Understanding darkened his expression. He stood, lifting her with him, and spread his cloak on the blanket near the fire. The makeshift bed was far from luxurious, but in that moment, it felt like the most precious place in the world. Kyle undressed her slowly, reverently, his calloused hands gentle, as they revealed skin that had never been touched by anyone. He paused when he found the knife strapped to her thigh, a slow smile spreading across his face. My warrior lady, he murmured, removing it carefully and setting it within her reach, a gesture of trust that meant more than any words. When she was bare before him, Ilara fought the instinct to cover herself. The cold air made her shiver, but Cale's heated gaze warmed her from the inside out. He looked at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "So damn beautiful it hurts to look at you." Then he was undressing himself, revealing a body marked by the life he'd lived, scars crisscrossing his chest and back, each one telling a story of violence survived. Ilara reached out, tracing the raised lines with curious fingers, and felt his muscles tense beneath her touch. "They don't frighten me," she said. "They're proof you survived. That you're strong." "They're proof I've been reckless," he corrected, but there was warmth in his voice. When he lay down beside her, pulling the edges of his cloak around them both, Ilara pressed against him, craving the heat of his skin. His hands explored her carefully, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch into his touch. She was wet between her thighs, aching with a need she didn't fully understand, but knew only he could satisfy. "Cale," she whispered, her hands clutching at his shoulders. "I know," he murmured, positioning himself between her legs. "I'll be gentle. Tell me if it hurts too much." She felt him pressing against her entrance, felt the stretch and burn as he began to push inside. It did hurt, a sharp ache that made her tense involuntarily. But Cale paused, kissing her deeply, his hands stroking her hair, her face, soothing her until she relaxed again. "That's it," he breathed. "Just relax. Let me in." He pushed deeper, and the pain intensified for a moment, before something seemed to give way. Ilara cried out softly, not entirely from pain. There was something else mixing with it, a strange pleasure that made her core clench around him. "Are you all right?" Cale asked, his voice strained with the effort of holding still. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, keep going." He moved slowly, carefully, letting her body adjust to his size. The pain gradually faded, replaced by a building pressure, a mounting pleasure that made her breath come in short gasps. She wrapped her legs around his waist, urging him deeper, and heard his groan of approval. "Ilara," he groaned, his hips beginning to move in a steady rhythm. "You feel so good, so perfect." She clung to him, lost in the sensation of being filled by him, claimed by him in the most intimate way possible. This was what she'd wanted, this connection, this proof that she was alive and making her own choices. Nothing about their situation was perfect, but this moment was theirs alone. Cale's movements grew more urgent, his control fraying, and Ilara felt something building inside her, a pressure that demanded release. His fingers found the sensitive bundle of nerves between her legs, circling it with expert precision, and suddenly she was flying apart, pleasure crashing over her in waves that made her cry out his name. Her climax triggered his own. He buried himself deep with a final thrust, spilling inside her with a groan that echoed through the silent forest. They clung to each other, trembling, as the aftershocks slowly faded. When Cale finally pulled out and rolled to his side, he immediately gathered her close, tucking her head against his shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Did I hurt you?" "A little at first," Ilara admitted, "but it was worth it." She smiled up at him. "Is it always like that?" "No," he said honestly. I've never felt anything like that before." They lay together as the fire burned low, their bodies cooling in the winter air. Cale pulled the cloak more tightly around them, creating a cocoon of warmth and safety. Ilara's eyes grew heavy, exhaustion from the escape, and the emotional intensity finally catching up with her. "Sleep," Cale murmured. "I'll keep watch." "Wake me in a few hours," she mumbled. "You need rest too." "I will," he promised, though she suspected he'd let her sleep longer. As consciousness faded, Alara's last thought was that she'd never felt more alive than in this moment. Fugitive, exposed to the elements, uncertain of the future. But free. Finally, gloriously free. And with Cale beside her, she believed they had a chance. Alara woke to muted sunlight filtering through the forest canopy, and Cale's gentle hand on her shoulder. She blinked up at him groggily, momentarily disoriented, before memory came rushing back. Their escape. The forest. What they'd shared by the fire. Her body ached in unfamiliar places, reminding her of their intimacy. But when she met Kyle's gaze, she saw no regret there, only warmth and concern. "We need to move," he said quietly. "I heard riders about an hour ago. They're searching, but they passed east of here. Still, we should put more distance between us and the castle." Alara nodded, pushing aside the cloak and reaching for her clothes. Dressing was awkward, her body stiff from sleeping on the ground and sore from her first sexual experience. Cale noticed her wincing, and his expression softened with guilt. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have been more careful." "Don't apologize for giving me exactly what I wanted," Alara replied firmly, though she accepted his hand when he helped her stand. "I'm fine, just adjusting." They ate a quick breakfast of the dried food from their packs, stamped out the fire carefully, and prepared the horses to ride. Storm nuzzled Alara's shoulder affectionately, as if sensing her mood, and she stroked the mare's neck with gratitude. "Where are we going?" she asked Cale as they mounted. "There's a trading post deeper in the forest, run by a man named Garrett. He's a free trader, doesn't owe allegiance to any lord, doesn't ask questions. If anyone can help us disappear, it's him." They rode through the forest in companionable silence, following a barely visible trail that Cale navigated with practiced ease. The Blackwood was beautiful in its winter stillness, the snow-laden branches creating a cathedral-like atmosphere. Occasionally they glimpsed wildlife, deer watching them pass with liquid eyes, a fox darting between trees, birds calling from the heights. It was peaceful in a way Alara had never experienced within castle walls. There was danger here, certainly, but it was honest danger, predators that killed to survive, not for political gain or inherited grudges. She found herself understanding why some people chose to live beyond civilization's reach. By midday, they reached the trading post, a sturdy log building with smoke rising from its chimney and a stable attached to one side. Several other horses were already there, and Alara felt a spike of anxiety. What if someone recognized them? What if word of their escape had already spread? But Cale seemed relaxed as he dismounted, so she followed his lead, trusting his judgment. "Let me do the talking," he said quietly. Garrett can be prickly about strangers. Inside, the trading post was warm and crowded with goods. Furs piled in corners, dried meat hanging from rafters, barrels of provisions stacked against walls. 3 men sat at a rough-hewn table near the fire, drinking ale and talking in low voices. They looked up when Kyle and Alara entered, their eyes assessing and hard. "Well, well," one of them drawled, a scarred brute with missing teeth. "Look what the forest dragged in, the rogue and his lady. Your uncle's offering quite the reward for your return, my lady, dead or alive." Alara's blood turned to ice. These men knew who they were, and worse, they clearly saw her as nothing more than a payday. Her hand instinctively went to the knife at her thigh, hidden beneath her cloak. Cale stepped slightly in front of her, his posture deceptively casual, but his hand resting on his sword hilt. "The lady is under my protection, Marcus. Anyone who touches her dies. You know my reputation well enough to know that's not an idle threat." Marcus grinned, unfazed. "Oh, I know your reputation, Thornwood, but there's 3 of us, and only one of you. Even the legendary rogue can't fight those odds." "Maybe not," came a new voice from the back room. but I can even them up considerably." A tall, gray-haired man emerged, carrying a crossbow loaded and aimed at Marcus's back. This had to be Garrett, and the relief Alara felt at his intervention was almost overwhelming. "This is my establishment," Garrett continued calmly, "and I don't tolerate violence under my roof unless I'm the one initiating it. So you three can finish your drinks quietly and leave, or I can put a bolt through Marcus's spine, and we'll see who wants to try their luck next." The three men exchanged glances, clearly calculating odds. Finally, Marcus stood slowly, his hands spread in mock surrender. "No need for hostilities, old man. We were just having a friendly conversation. Then have it elsewhere." Marcus and his companions left, but not before Marcus cast one last venomous look at Alara. "See you soon, my lady. Real soon." After the door closed behind them, Garrett lowered his crossbow with a sigh. "You're attracting quite the attention, Thornwood. Lord Edmonds put the word out all across the territory. 500 gold pieces for the girl's return, another 100 for your head. That's more than most men see in a lifetime." "I know," Kyle said. "That's why I came to you. We need passage through the forest, supplies, and information. What's happening at the castle?" Garrett moved behind his counter, pouring himself a measure of amber liquid. "Lord Edmund discovered the lady missing at first light, tore the castle apart looking for her before realizing she'd actually escaped. He's convinced you seduced her, betrayed your contract, the whole dramatic tale. Half his guard is scouring the countryside, and he sent messages to every lord and trading post offering that reward." "Has anyone accepted?" Alara asked, finding her voice. Garrett's shrewd eyes assessed her. "Not openly, not yet. Most folks around here don't love Edmund. He's taxed the merchants heavily and executed more than a few free traders for poaching on his lands. But 500 gold is a powerful temptation. You can't trust anyone, my lady, not even those who seem sympathetic. Can we trust you?" she asked bluntly. A smile tugged at Garrett's weathered face. "Thornwood saved my daughter's life 5 years ago. Killed the bandits who'd taken her, brought her home safely. Wouldn't even accept payment beyond a hot meal and a night's shelter. So yes, my lady, you can trust me. I owe this rogue a debt I can never fully repay." Some of the tension left Alara's shoulders. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Garrett warned. "Helping you means painting a target on my back too. But I'm too old to care much about that." He refilled his drink and poured 2 more for Kyle and Alara. "Now tell me your plan, because surely you have one beyond just running blind through the forest." Kyle accepted the drink gratefully. "We need to reach the southern territories, beyond Edmund's reach. From there, Alara can petition the king's court directly for recognition as rightful heir. With witnesses testifying to Edmund's abuse and unlawful seizure of power, she might have a chance." "Might being the operative word," Garrett said. "The king's court is corrupt as they come. They'll rule in favor of whoever bribes them most, and Edmund's got deeper pockets than a fugitive lady." "Then we'll find another way," Alara said firmly. "I won't let my uncle steal my father's legacy. Those lands, those people, they deserve better than Edmund's greed." Garrett studied her for a long moment, then nodded with approval. "You've got fire, girl. I like that. The world needs more women who refuse to bend." He pulled out a map, spreading it across the counter. "The southern border is here, about a week's hard ride through the forest. But Edmund's men will be watching all the obvious routes. You'll need to go deeper into the Blackwood, into territory even the hunters avoid." "Why do they avoid it?" Alara asked, studying the map. "Old superstitions, mostly. Tales of strange sounds in the night. Livestock that wanders in but never comes out. Probably just wolves and bears, but fear keeps most folks away, which means Edmund's men are less likely to search there thoroughly." "Then that's where we'll go," Kale decided. "Can you supply us for a week? And information on any safe havens along the way?" "I can and will." Garrett began gathering provisions: dried meat, hard cheese, journey bread, Medical supplies. There's a cabin 3 days' ride northwest, built by hunters decades ago and mostly forgotten. It's stocked with basics if you need a place to weather a storm or hide from pursuit. Beyond that, you're on your own until you reach the Southern Territories. As Garrett prepared their supplies, Ilara wandered to the fire, warming her hands. The reality of their situation was sinking in. They were genuinely outlaws now, hunted with a price on their heads. The romance of their escape was fading into the harsh practicality of survival. She felt Cale's presence before he touched her, his hand settling warm on her lower back. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly. "About leaving?" "Never. About whether we'll survive what comes next." She glanced up at him. "I'm not naive, Cale. I know the odds are against us." "They've been against me my whole life," he said with a slight smile. "I'm still here. Because you're skilled and lucky, but how long can luck last?" Instead of answering, he turned her to face him fully, his hands cupping her face. "Listen to me, Ilara. No matter what happens, you made the right choice. Even if they catch us, even if everything goes wrong, you chose freedom over submission. That matters. That will always matter." She kissed him then, there in front of Garrett and the crackling fire, pouring all her fear and hope into the contact. When they parted, she saw understanding in his eyes. He was afraid too, but he was choosing bravery anyway. That was love, she realized with sudden clarity. Not the romanticized version from songs and stories, but the real thing, choosing to face the darkness together, rather than alone. "All set," Garrett announced, hefting 2 packs stuffed with supplies. "This should see you through to the Southern Territories if you ration carefully. I've also included some coins and a sealed letter of introduction to a merchant I know in Ravensport. He can help you establish new identities if you make it that far." "Thank you," Ilara said sincerely. "I know you're risking a great deal helping us." Garrett waved off her gratitude. "I've lived long enough to know that some risks are worth taking. You remind me of my daughter. Same fire. Same refusal to accept injustice. She'd want me to help you." He clasped Kyle's forearm in the warrior's greeting. "Keep her safe, Rogue, and keep yourself safe while you're at it." "I'll do my best," Kyle promised. They left the trading post as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the temperature dropping rapidly. Marcus and his companions were nowhere to be seen, but Ilara felt eyes watching them from the forest. The knowledge that they were prey now, hunted by men motivated by greed, made her skin crawl. They rode hard through the afternoon, pushing deeper into the territory Garrett had marked on their map. The forest grew denser here, the trees older and more tightly packed. The path, such as it was, became increasingly difficult to follow, and several times they had to backtrack when they encountered impassable terrain. As darkness fell, Kyle called a halt in a small hollow protected by a rocky outcropping. They made a cold camp, not daring to light a fire that might give away their position. Instead, they huddled together beneath their cloaks, sharing body heat and dried food. "Do you think they're still following us?" Ilara whispered. "Probably. Marcus isn't the type to give up easily when there's profit involved." Cale's arm tightened around her shoulders. "But we have the advantage of knowing this forest better than most, thanks to Garrett's information. If we're smart and careful, we can stay ahead of them. And if we're not smart and careful, then I fight while you run. That's the deal." "Ilara, if something happens to me, you keep going. Promise me." Ilara shook her head immediately, her eyes fierce in the moonlight. "No, Kyle. Don't ask me to promise that. I won't abandon you, not after everything you've done for me." Kyle met her gaze, deadly serious even as he softened his tone. "Ilara, listen to me. If it comes down to it, if they capture us, everything we've fought for dies with both of us. You're the heir, not me. You're the one who can stand before the king, before the lords, and expose your uncle. My life. It's a weapon. Yours is a legacy. You have to survive." She reached up, grasping his face between her gloved hands. "And what good is a legacy if I lose the man who made me believe I could fight for it?" Her voice trembled but didn't break. "I won't choose survival over you. Not again. Not ever." Cale sighed, the tension in his jaw shifting into a resigned sort of pain. "You're stubborn as they come, my lady." "Then we're alike," she whispered, half smiling through the fear as she leaned her forehead against his. Two fools, defying the world together. He brushed a thumb down her cheek, tender, reverent. Together then, whatever comes. The next morning broke gray and bitterly cold. Frost coated everything. Horsetack, their cloaks, even Alara's lashes when she woke. Cale had kept watch for most of the night, moving silently around their small camp while she tried to rest. When she stirred, he had already saddled the horses and packed their supplies. "Eat quickly," he said, handing her a strip of dried meat and a flask. "We need to cover ground before the hunters stir again. Garrett's map marks a creek 2 hours west. Once we reach that water, we'll follow it upstream. It masks our tracks." Alara nodded, pulling her cloak tighter as she chewed. Her stomach churned too much for food, but Cale was right. She needed strength. They mounted and rode west, the morning sun hidden behind a thick quilt of clouds, snowflakes drifting lazily through the air. For hours, the forest was deathly still. Only the crunch of hooves and the occasional caw of a raven broke the silence. The deeper they rode, the more oppressive the woods became. Trunks clustered close, skeletal branches forming dark webs overhead. Alara couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was watching, waiting. By midday, they reached the creek. Thin and half-frozen, it wound north to south like a silver vein through the landscape. It would make their tracks all but invisible to anyone following. Cale dismounted and crouched by the water, studying the snow around them. Alara followed his gaze and tensed, the faint print of a boot, half filled with icy slush. "They're close," she breathed. "Too close," Cale muttered. His fingers brushed the print, reading it like a map. At least 3 men, moving fast. Marcus, most likely. They've split their group. He's smart enough to predict we'd use the creek. "What do we do?" Cale stood, decision flashing like steel in his eyes. "We play a different game. We go south for an hour to mislead them, then double back northwest. There's a hunter's cabin Garrett mentioned. It should be near the ridge. We'll hole up there for a day, let them pass. And if they find us, then we end it," he said simply, tightening his gloves. "One way or another." They followed the creek for an hour before Kyle turned sharply away into thicker forest, guiding Storm and Shadow up a deer track barely wide enough for their passage. The ground was uneven, slick with snow. Alara gritted her teeth and held tight to her saddle as branches whipped against her cloak. By late afternoon, the clouds had darkened, signaling another storm. They reached the ridge just as snow began to fall heavier, veiling the world in white. Cale spotted a dim shape ahead, a slanted roof barely visible through the trees. "There," he nodded. "The cabin." It was small, half buried in snow but intact, its log walls weathered black with age. Smoke had not risen from its chimney in months, maybe years, but it stood solid. Shelter, blessing, and risk in equal measure. Kyle dismounted first, sword already drawn as he circled the clearing to check for signs of life. When he returned, he nodded. Empty. Alara exhaled, relief washing through her. Together they pulled open the heavy door. Snow spilled inward, revealing a dim interior lit by thin daylight through cracks in the roof. A stone hearth dominated one wall, and shelves lined with long-forgotten hunting tools leaned against the other. Kyle moved swiftly, checking corners and shadows before conceding it was safe. "Close the shutters," he said, as he struck flint to spark a small fire. "We'll keep the light low, just enough for warmth." Elara obeyed, securing the wooden slats and wrapping her cloak around her shoulders as the fire caught. The warmth spread slowly, thawing her numb fingers. Cale shed his gloves and crouched by the flame, his face lit in shifting orange. "We'll stay until the storm passes," he said, glancing toward the narrow window. "It's a blessing in disguise. Snow will bury our tracks. With luck, Marcus's men won't think to look this far." Elara sank onto a wooden bench, exhaustion fogging her thoughts. "It feels strange hiding like this. My father would have charged out to face them head on." Cale looked over, a faint smile touching his lips. "And probably gotten himself killed sooner for it. Bravery's not always about swordplay, Elara. Sometimes it's knowing when to run so you can fight another day." She studied him in the firelight. His scar, the tension in his shoulders, the shadow in his eyes that rarely eased. "You've run before, haven't you?" "Many times," he admitted after a long pause. "When you live by the sword, running becomes survival. But this..." He looked at her fully now, expression softening. "This is the first time I've been running toward something, not away." Her chest tightened. "Toward what?" He didn't hesitate. "Toward you." The words silenced her. The fire crackled, flames reflecting in his gray eyes. Without thinking, she reached across the small space between them. Her fingers brushed his wrist, tentative, questioning. Cale turned his hand over and laced their fingers together. "You make me forget who I used to be," he said quietly. "With you, I'm not Cale the rogue or the hired blade. I'm just a man trying to be worthy of something good." "You already are," she whispered. He shook his head, thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Not yet, but maybe one day." Outside, the wind howled like wolves, shaking the shutters. Inside, the world shrank to firelight, warmth, and the steady sound of their breathing. Elara leaned closer, resting her cheek against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, careful and protective, as though she were something precious he had no right to hold, but couldn't let go. Hours passed with the storm raging unseen. Fatigue and safety, temporary though it was, lulled them into a fragile peace. When the fire dwindled to embers, Cale added one last log and looked down at her where she'd fallen asleep against him, her hair spilling across his chest. Her face, soft in slumber, looked innocent in a way life would never allow again. Cale brushed a lock of hair from her brow and whispered a vow only the fire would hear. "No matter what happens, I'll keep you free." When dawn came, the storm had eased. Snow lay thick on the ground, undisturbed, a perfect white canvas hiding every trace of their trail. Elara stirred beside him, stretching beneath their shared cloak. Her lips curved faintly before her eyes even opened. "We survived another night." "Barely," Kyle said, though there was warmth in his grin. "But it's a start. Come on, let's see if Lady Fortune's smiling." They stepped outside into a frozen silence so deep it hummed. The world glittered with frost, the air sharp as glass. For a heartbeat, everything seemed pure and untouched. Then Kyle's eyes caught motion on the ridge. A raven circled once overhead before darting west. Kyle's expression hardened. "Scouting bird, Marcus is still out there." Elara followed his gaze. "Can ravens be trained to track?" "They can be followed. He's using every advantage he can find." He tightened Shadow's reins. "We move now. South by southwest this time. The ridgeline will shield us for a few hours." Elara mounted Storm, her pulse hammering anew. As they set off again into the endless snow, she couldn't help glancing back at the cabin fading into the white. A safe haven once, but the kind that never lasts. Every hoofbeat carried them deeper into danger and closer to the uncertain salvation of the southern border. Yet beneath the fear, Ilara felt something fierce and bright growing inside her, a flame that no storm, no uncle, no army of men could snuff out. Freedom had changed her. Chaol had changed her. And she knew, whatever awaited them beyond the forest, she would never again be the girl who waited in silence behind castle bars. She was the woman who would ride through snow and shadow, wild and alive, beside the man who broke his vow beneath the moon.